So yesterday, the Saints wrapped up OTAs, finishing that phase of the offseason and ready to move on to the next phase, which is minicamp starting next week. Got some takeaways from Kellen talking to the media, plus some takeaways from the media who were able to attend practice. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So probably the biggest takeaway, and definitely kind of one of the biggest talking points early in the press conference, which was one of the shorter ones that he's given after OTA practices. But it was about the offensive line, and it started off early. It was less than a minute in after he started speaking with the media, and it just kind of started off with a question once again that kind of boiled down to continuity.
Some of the communication, some of the nonverbal communication. Would you consider it important to get the guys in spots as soon as possible, get them to know each other as good as you can?
Continuity is always valuable in this space, and so those guys are going to work together a lot. Obviously, we're trying to keep that as consistent as possible. Understanding there's flexibility within this. Things happen. It's long NFL seasons. Those guys are going to have to, someone's going to have to move a spot probably in the middle of the season at some point, and so, they'll handle that accordingly.
So continuity, I mean, look, that's a lot about not moving players around right now, which I think it was all but confirmed. But once again, it's just a reinforcement that the plan is, I think, until it doesn't work, if it doesn't work, is Banks, Penning, McCoy, Ruiz, Fuaga. And the key linchpin about this that he talks about in a follow-up a few minutes later is about Eric McCoy, because they're asking specifically about his value. And he reinforces this thought like he's the leader. He's the guy that they're going to lean on. He's one of the best centers in the league. And this continuity is going to come from him. Then he's going to have to be the kind of the Pied Piper where everybody follows along behind him to get this to work. And I have all the confidence in the world McCoy is capable of doing that. But they asked, and he reinforced. And again, I think a lot of this after the 3 weeks of OTAs was almost affirmation from the media. What we're seeing and what we're hearing is this really what's going on? And I think more is like, yeah, it's about as I think open a communication from a head coach that you can get in the NFL without giving away trade secrets. What I take away from this is like whatever his plan is and the process is, and you know, talking with my brother-in-law, the sports accountant yesterday, he brought this up and I had to agree. And this has been brought up in the comments on some of the previous videos. It's a feeling of confidence that we don't know if any of this is going to work, but he's coming in, it seems like for the first time in a long time, with a plan, with a process. This is how we're going to do it. Everything meticulously calculated almost to how we're going to get from where we are now to where we want to be as fast as possible, but understanding that it could still take some time. And if we're seeing progress, I mean, right now we're hearing about progress more than we're seeing it, but if we see progress, and if it starts with that offensive line really starting to build a unit like we used to have, like the better teams around the league have, it's going to go a long way to making this work. The next follow up, and this was right on the heels of him talking about McCoy, was from Bobby Abe at the Cajun Cannon. Now, his question is more centered about what's happening on the defensive line, specifically. Look, we got to get better defending the run. How's it going to look? The personnel, but the question was basically, how are you evaluating the defensive line? Because it's along a very similar question asked last week in his media availability after an OTA about the offensive line. And he kind of gave, not only the offensive line, but the defensive line type all-inclusive answer. And he does it again here. And I think it's worth noting that he quickly is basically talking about it's kind of the same in a way for every player. Bobby asked specifically about the defensive line, but he's like, it's both sides of the ball.
How can you evaluate the D line right now, the defense as a whole, as far as run defense, where look how the OTA is structured, minicamp and training camp?
I did kind of like the Kellen Moore's kind of reaction smile there. It's like, okay, Kind of the same question we got last week, just in a different form, basically focused on the opposite side of the ball.
Pleased right now with the personnel, or is that a wait and see if you're going to try and make improvements in that area?
Certainly from a run game perspective on both sides of the football, you're not going to get a real great evaluation this time of year. It's more, hey, are they assignment sound? Do they understand their responsibility?
Assignment sound, and do they understand their responsibilities? I questioned over the last couple of years if those two things were being stressed, emphasized, and reinforced by the previous coaching staff. I really, really do. So I hope, again, this is all words. We're not seeing it yet, but I'm hoping this one coaching staff is stressing it, enforcing it, and going to make the players, hey, you're going to be sound, you're going to know your responsibilities, or we're going to find someone who will.
The execution and what it looks like ultimately won't happen until training camp. But these guys are doing everything they can from a fundamental perspective and individual. Certainly our defensive line, offensive line spend a ton of time on individual. That's really the bulk of their days this time of year. And so, it's going to be a growing process as we go through it.
I like the fact that he's also reinforcing the way that OTAs are structured. And there's a couple follow-up questions we'll talk about in a second. That it's about, like we said, are they assignment sound? Do they know what they're doing? Are they understanding their responsibility? Another way of saying accountability. Remember that word was constantly getting thrown around the last couple of seasons with, as far as we could tell, little to no actual player accountability on the field for when things go wrong. So again, I'm hoping this is way more than just words, and it's going to become a practice, because you don't fix those two things that were obviously wrong the last couple of seasons. You can forget about the goals, the lofty goals that we hope, this team can eventually achieve. It's just not going to happen. But also about the individual work, kind of the fundamental work, which is another thing that I think we lacked. No, I don't think. I goddamn well know. At times we lacked. You could watch games where we could be fundamentally sound for a while, and then we were fundamentally awful. And bad things happen. And the majority of the time, it was really annoying to watch us lose a game we should win, lose a game we had a chance to win, especially against, kind of Washington comes to mind. We had a chance to steal that game. Didn't happen. But where it really annoys me is the teams that we should be come in and beat us down. Raiders, Panthers, second time around. And a lot of that was just fact based, couldn't play fundamental ball for 4 quarters. So talking about individual work or technique, so important that I'm glad look, if we have to spend every second of OTA trying to drill this into the players' heads and get it where it needs to be, so be it. Do it. It's got to happen. Because the three things he's talking about here, about assignments, about responsibilities, and about, individual work, fundamentals, it's the basis of your team, and we did not do a good job of having that the last couple of seasons. Now, they also asked a couple, I think, really good follow-up questions on this, because he was asked specifically about minicamp, which the only real difference, they're treating minicamp from OTAs. OTAs is not mandatory. If you follow a lot of the Saints media on Twitter, the usual suspects, as I call them, and I don't want to miss anybody because, Nick Underhill, Matthew Parris, Ross Jackson, Mike Triplett, Larry Holder, those guys. Catherine Terrell, sorry, should not leave her off. They'll periodically provide lists about who is in attendance at OTAs, but it's one of those things where, since it's not mandatory, and it's basically the veterans, the rookies and the new guys, yeah, they're there. You kind of like, okay. But when you get to minicamp, it's mandatory. So it's going to be basically 3 days of a lot of what they were doing the last 3 weeks, but now everybody's going to be there. And as far as some of the veterans, and like, I don't know of any, but I'm sure there are some that didn't show up at all. But for the most part, someone would be there a few days. It may not be for a few. I don't even think that's necessarily a bad thing. They're veterans. They know what's going on. He was asked about it in one of the follow-ups, and he's talking about, yeah, those guys they develop routines. You're not too worried that they're not where you need them to be at this point. But they all have to be here next week. They all have to be here mandatory training camp, obviously. And so he's expecting full attendance next week. He did. They asked about that, and he did say, "Yeah, expect everybody to be here for that whole time." And also, clued it in and reinforce. It's like, it's still a lot about the things we're doing now. The the real payoff, the real evaluation, when we can go live, when we can hit, and we can put the pads on and do all that stuff in training camp, is going to determine a lot. And I also think, in a way, some of the veterans not being a full 100% attendance in OTAs for us right now is a very good thing because it allows young guys to get work. And there's no getting around that. We're going to need the young guys to be assignment sound, to know their responsibilities and be held accountable, and to, that individual work, those techniques and everything, have that down. So you get a little chance to get them some more reps and into that. And we're hearing like some of the rookies, like Danny Stutzman, his name has come up an awful lot, but he's not the only one. That some of the rookies are really like, or the newer guys going, yeah, they can play. They could make this team, and they could help us both in the short term and the long run. About another minute or so later, Trevor Penning's move to left guard was brought up again, and the media asking the question was kind of tying it into what the Eagles did last year, and I think there's a really relevant response from Kellen Moore on this.
We asked you before about Trevor Penning's move to guard, but out of the selling point last year with the Eagles' offensive line was just the sheer size across the board in all five. Was that also a big factor in having a 6'7" guy go on the inside to add to that girth for the offensive line?
Yeah, I think certainly you have to be able to anchor in this league in some capacity, and so you're going to get bull rush. If you can't beat if a bull rush, if someone can run through you, there's going to be challenges no matter what the circumstance is. And so Trevor playing a guard, he's got size, he's got mass, he's got physicality that's going to be perfect for that position. And obviously, our experience the last couple spots everyone's been has had those guys go from tackle to guard, so we feel good about the transition.
If you look at and kind of had the feeling in his comments when we first hired him, his very first press conference, and he was asked about scheme and the run game in a couple of different ways, a couple of different questions. He acknowledged what they did in Philly about trying to be balanced gap scheme and zone scheme, and being able to, we want to keep the defense guessing, but the flexibility to go, look, if we got to go in the middle of a game, if we got to go heavy gap scheme runs, that's what we're going to do, or heavy zone, that's what we're going to do, or change from game to game, depending on who we're playing against. The game plan and the play calling may depend on that, which focus on the scheme you run. So I'm expecting the plan, and I think it's a great one. Try to rebuild, construct some semblance of that insanely good Philly line last year. Mekhi Becton's the guy that kind of tied it all together when he was a tackle that they got from the Jets, moved him to guard, and just solidified that whole offensive line. So I think they're trying a very similar approach here. Now I think the thing that you really kind of have to tie together in all this is one of the reasons why Penning moving to the inside, and this is what makes me nervous. Our right side last year, Ruiz and Penning were a lot better than they had been. Better coaching, there's no doubt about that. But also that scheme change of the wide zone. And I don't expect, Philly did do some wide zone. I would expect that'll be part of it. That's part of the zone scheme. But Kubiak's last year was heavy, 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 heavy wide zone, some inside zone, where I expect the counter on this. When Kellen Moore was in Dallas with Mike McCarthy, much like Kubiak, more emphasis on the wide zone. But last year in Philly, and the Chargers, the 1 year with the Chargers, I don't really know, to be honest with you. And that was such a screwed up year with everybody on the way out the door about ready to get fired. I don't even know if it's relevant. But last year when he made the change, and it's said they started working on changing up that blocking scheme after playing the Saints in that close game in the dome. A lot more inside zone runs, running off that gap scheme, more combo blocks. And that's all the stuff that he's talking about, continuity, the verbal and nonverbal that he's talked about the last couple of weeks, all tied together. So I think you're really getting an insight of what we want to do. You know, and he wants some size, Penning, moving into that left guard position. And I get it. The thing I will say about Penning, though, I just keep going back to his draft profile, and a lot of it was when he was drafted, potentially going to be a good left tackle, which I don't know if that's ever going to happen in the league, but most people, it's a project, but a lot of draft analysts saying, but you know what? He should be able to play guard starting in the NFL, and he may eventually move to tackle. So I'm feeling maybe they're seeing some of the same things some of the draft analysts were seeing when Penning came out in the draft, and we'll see how it works out. Sports accountant and I were talking about Ruiz is our concern because when we were trying to run whatever the hell that was, Pete Carmichael was trying to run with Ruiz, and even Sean's last year, he did the physical part of it, seemed to struggle with a little bit. And Moore is talking about, bull rushes and not getting run over. But Ruiz has grown a lot and more used to that guard spot because we just have to remember he was a freaking center in college, and we assumed we could move him to guard, and it may work out. Last year gives indication that he can, but we'll see once again how this. It's not a major scheme change; it's stuff it's been exposed to, but that part of the physical, we'll see how that works out, and if it does work out, then I think we have the basis of getting this young offensive line anchored by the veteran McCoy some real traction in becoming one of the better offensive lines in the NFL. I'm not saying they will be or that they are close, but these are the things we need to work out to even have a chance to make that happen. Now, he was asked a question about Alontae Taylor, and he gives a kind of, you know, recap of what he's seen from Taylor and what he thinks about Alontae Taylor, which is very complimentary. And kick in that some of the um, beat writers, some observations from practice yesterday that I think kind of reinforce what Moore is going to talk about here.
Impressions of Alontae Taylor, just the energy, the everything in these 3 weeks. What have you learned about Alontae Taylor in OTAs?
Yeah, I love watching Alontae. He is he's everything you want. He competes every day. He's got juice. He's got energy. He's out there flying around. He can play a number of positions. Just feel like he's going to become a really prominent leader for our team.
If you've been watching this channel, I'm a huge Alontae Taylor fan, and was a little, let's kind of rewind the last, well, basically since he's been here. Um, so on the outside as a rookie, yeah, struggled a little bit, but at time you could see it. Then his second year, they wanted to fiddle around with moving him to the inside, and I don't think, and Joe Woods later admitted, we did not do a good enough job to prepare him to play on the inside, which they concentrated on all last offseason. He shows up, and I'm like, yes, playmaker at that spot. And he was a playmaker, heavily involved in the running game, and especially the pass rush, and still gave you pretty decent coverage where he could break up some passes and do his thing there. The injury stacked up, moving back to the outside, and he was kind of picked on playing opposite at that point, Kool-Aid McKinstry, because of all the injuries and the Lattimore trade. I think teams were kind of picking on him and finding some vulnerabilities staying away from Kool-Aid, which, makes sense. I like the fact that they recognize working hard to try to get players. Again, I'm stealing this from TJ Paganetti, our run game coordinator, not putting guys in a position where they're going to suck. I still love that comment, that philosophy, and I think all the way on the coaching staff, that's the goal. And getting Taylor back on the inside, I think, is huge, huge. That being said, and he talked about his compete because I think a lot of Taylor's just a dog. I really do, and I it's last year in a contract, so I hope he plays well. We can bring him back during the season with an extension. He plays at a high level, and we're going to have that playmaking guy on this team in that secondary for quite a long time. But his versatility and the fact um, Matthew Paris, when he was there, noticed that Taylor worked mostly outside today. Now, it was some base and some sub packages where Ugo Amadi and Terrell Burgess, who I keep forgetting we signed, is on the team that used to play in with the Chargers under Brandon Staley, were getting some of the snaps inside. So that versatility, I think is going to be very important. Many players, but with the right coaching staff, getting him prepared, and I think we have the right one to do that. Where they're going to say, look, inside, outside. They're never going to put it or try not to put him in a position where he's going to suck, but an understanding of how he's going to operate in this defense and be able to play both inside and outside. And if he can do that, we have a true stud. I really believe that in that secondary that can run around and make some plays and be disruptive, which goes to Ross Jackson's Twitter observation yesterday. And he had a list of running around, broke up some passes, was very active, very vocal as the leader that Kellen Moore was talking about being a vocal leader. And Ross Jackson was basically, he was the player of the day on the field from what he saw. Just the way he operated, the way he played, and the way he was, I'm kind of deriving this from his Twitter comments, but the way he was showing leadership, which to me is huge to get a young player like him to stand up and be able to do that. About the 8-minute, 30-second mark, he was asked about Foster Moreau, and I'm not going to play the clip on this one, but it really boiled down to Foster Moreau's leadership and how much Kellen Moore loves Foster Moreau, thinks he's an important part of this team. And even though he's injured from a knee injury that he got late in the season, they even asked him about that and him trying to play in that game, and he's like, "Look, that's the player that he is, and that's the type of player we want on this team." Now, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you when it comes to Foster Moreau. I always felt he was an underappreciated tight end in the league. I mean, I always called him he's a pro's pro tight end. Can do a little bit of everything, do it well. He's a leader. He's a guy that you want on your team because he's going to go out and do the dirty work nobody wants to do and not even care about it. He's going to play hard if they let him. That's the guy he is. And I think it's hugely important that especially being vocal about it, hugely important you have this on your team. But because he's so balanced, he can play in line as a true tight end in the line of scrimmage. You can split him out. He can help you in the passing game. He can give you some yards after catch if you're going to use him in the short game. Definitely block. He's got a good understanding of scheme. If you watched him operate last year in that wide zone with Kubiak, they threw a lot of responsibility on him as far as both being sometimes at the same time involved in the running game, but able to get out in the passing game if necessary on an RPO, or when we were doing one of those wide option where everybody's blocking like it's a wide zone, not wide option, wide zone, but we were really throwing the ball and he's leaking out to be a pass catcher. You can go on and on. So that was really a brief comment by Kellen Moore. And to be honest with you, as important as I thought he was to this team, I was spent most of the offseason thinking he's probably going to be a salary cap casualty, especially when we restructured Juwan Johnson. But no, this sounds like this is, and I think it's hugely important to have him in the building and in the tight end room. And it sounds like Kellen Moore is fully on board with that and expects Moreau to be a guy that's going to make plays on the field and then be the guy to lead that tight end room off the field. Now, they also asked about Juwan Johnson, who, look, he said he's impressing me with his receiving skills. And he says, and he's in a big body. And I mean, there's a lot of talk about our receiving core, nobody over 6'2", yada, yada, yada. I've even made comments about that, but kind of thinking when we didn't go out of our way to bring anybody in, either in the draft or in free agency, and we were going with smaller, faster guys on the outside of wide receiver, on that, I think they were hanging everything on Juwan Johnson is that big body guy that we're going to use in the red zone or when we need, tough yards on a catch. See how it works out, because I don't know if Juwan Johnson's ever fully graduated to that point, but he's shown it at times. He's flashed, and it's now to the point he's going to have to be the guy in this offense. I think he's going to be the integral part in the passing game. Don't forget about Jack Stoll, the blocking guy, who also kind of sounds like in this OTA, they've been trying to get the ball to him in the passing game, see what he looks like. Sounds like so far so good as far as that. But you're also going to be looking at the young tight ends on this roster, because in a guy like Moreau, that's where he's really, really going to bring some value to you. There's no fullback on this roster, nor do I expect one to be. I expect a lot of 12 personnel. I expect you're going to need more than just those top three tight ends. So you're talking about guys like Holker and Jacobson and the rookie Mataval. Somebody in there is going to have to step up and be an integral part of this. And a guy like Foster Moreau is going to be a big help to get you in there. I don't know if there's any free agency tight end help anywhere if it comes to that, to try to get this offense to work with what looks like a lot of heavy 12 personnel. And in that 12 personnel, when you want to go to the slot with a bigger receiver, likely to be Juwan Johnson, we'll see how it all works out. But somebody, I think, in that group of Hoker, Mataval, Jacobson, gonna have to make a leap to grab that fourth tight end spot, especially since we do not know if we're going to have Taysom Hill available at any point in the season.
What do you think this defensive scheme could do for a guy like Chase Young?
Well, certainly he's going to be a pass rusher, and there'll be some versatile roles that he'll be able to do, and we'll be able to line up in some different fronts and structures and all that fun stuff. But allow him to maximize, be an edge rusher, play with some width, and get after the QB.
Is there a bit of a discovery process on the defensive line at this point, just figuring out what guys can do in this new system?
Yes, absolutely. O-line, D-line, a lot.
So on the Chase Young comments, primary role is pass rusher. They're going to ask him to do other stuff. And in a, quote 3-4, odd man front, you're going to see that. That's, those guys are primarily pass rushers, but they're going to step into other roles, coverage, things like that at times. Seems to be so far no problem with him, or even Granderson, who they didn't ask about in these roles. Both of them appear to have slimmed down some. But I think there's a little hidden reference in there, to maximizing as a pass rusher and mentioning playing with width. When you say playing with width, I'm thinking wide nine. Now, basically, wide nine is, your odd front, your edge rushers are outside the tackle. Well, wide nine, as it implies, you get a little wider. Try to build up more momentum in that pass rush to the quarterback, and also sometimes can get a better angle on beating that offensive tackle to get back there. I think you're going to see some versions of that. But I think what's going on here in that second part about finding, the defensive line, and he tied it in, and we're doing the same thing on the offensive line and, whatever. But I think this is a case of we were thinking, or at least I was, and I wasn't the only one, that some type of hybrid defense. I mean, you got all these leftover 4-3 guys up front. Can any of them play in a 3-4 or any type of odd man front? How is that going to work? What are you going to do? Where do you find the roles? Is this going to be a kind of a 4-3 scheme with a little 3-4 sprinkled in? I was wondering that myself. Answers like this give me the impression of a hell to the no. We're trying to run that 3-4, and we're trying to bring in personnel that can do it, and we're trying to find guys who are already on the roster who can make the transition and help us do it. And it was a little off put when the whole preseason, not preseason, but pre-opening of the season in March, when we started restructuring everybody. Now, it has gotten complicated because of the Derek Carr situation, and not even interested in talking about that anymore. But there was some of the reasoning was, well, you restructured everybody. It was either kind of a restructure car and move on from some of the everybody's over the next 2 years, or vice versa. And now we're kind of finding, I think, as this is all played out, whether this was, again, this offseason's been so wacky. I don't know if it's the plan or if it's just kind of working out this way. But regardless, think what's going on now with all those restructures. And the Saints are kind of known for some of these things where they kind of reward a guy who's been here for a while, but he's getting his money up front, but he may not make it through the season or even to the final 53-man roster. I'm wondering if some of these restructures, especially on the defensive line, that's what that's all about. Thank you for your service. We appreciate everything you did. We're going to give you an honest, and I believe this is letting the player know it's an honest chance to earn your spot in this new scheme. But if you can't do it, and we brought in some people who can, we're going to be moving on. And I'm not specifically thinking about any defensive linemen or any edge rushers in this scenario. You could probably come up with some names, but I get why you have to do it. At the end of this, this is all a business, and that may actually be part of the plan going forward. I don't know, of if you look at our defensive front, basically edge rushers and interior guys, all the way through the roster, how many spots are really, really safe? Now, Young's is, and there's a few others, but it's going to be an interesting question to answer later on at some point, especially in training camp. It's about the 11-minute mark. They asked him about Devon Godchaux, which kind of ties into all this. It's like, what did he bring to the table? And what he brings is just yet another experienced 3-4 type guy who in the league has a reputation of being able to play well in that scheme, do some things at many multiple spots along that defensive line, whether you're going to put him in the zero technique and line him up in the center or move him a little further down in the interior, that he could operate basically in any spot in there, which is going to this flexibility a lot. We mentioned some of the rookies turning some heads and making some names in OTAs. Defensive tackle Broughton doing the same thing and along those same lines. So, this could be a more of a turnover at this defensive front, and even on the edge, bringing in guys like Rump, drafting Diggs. There could be some. I don't think there could be. I'm pretty much convinced there's a lot of spots that are wide open, and there's going to be some real battles here coming in training camp. So, a couple other quick points. A little bit of this is intertwined in more speaking to the media, as well as, again, I call them the usual suspects: Underhill, Paris, Jackson, Triplett, Holder, Terrell. Their work there as the media that covers, and kind of what they're putting out there, especially on Twitter, as it was happening, not as it was happening, right after they witnessed practice and throwing some of the information out here. One time I'm going to say the I word. So for its injury, it seems we are in a lot better shape than I can remember in such a GD long time. It's maddening. There are some minor ones. For instance, yesterday the media caught and actually they didn't even ask more. This is kind of, he just threw it out figuring they'd notice. But um, two players, Nick Saldivari and Dallas Beanham, were not there yesterday in practice when the media was there, and he just basically said they're unavailable. Um, it was injury related, but nothing considered to be long term or serious or anything like that. Didn't go any more detail than that. And really, if you think about it, in OTAs, it's really hard to hide anything major. About the only thing that was major was Jake Hayner's injury on the oblique, and really major for him personally, as that is really going to hurt his ability to get into the mix for the starting QB battle, which we'll talk about in a second. But he did participate. Some of them saw, I said, getting a little work in at the very beginning of practice and doing some work on the side, probably part of his rehab from that injury, as well as seeing Foster Moreau and Dallin Holker, who's another one that really needs to get out there quick and get some work in, but also them getting some side work in, getting ready, recovering from their injuries. Quincy Riley, um, he was seen participating in some individual drills and walkthrough, and also getting a little work in on the side. Also, he was asked about more, answer going, yeah, he's progressing. He's coming along. No indication if he'll be ready to go next week in minicamp or not, or any of these other players. My best guess would be no, but you never know. Um, so I think we are seeing, at least so far, because we're not getting all the negative crap we were already getting a year ago at this point about injuries and the rehab process of guys that were hurt that we're trying to get back in time to get them ready for the season. Feels like we're ahead of the curve. Hopefully it stays that way, but I think we're finally concentrating and at least apparently doing a better job of preventing what we can hopefully prevent, and the ones that the stuff that happened, getting them through the rehab process as quick as we can while not endangering them at all to be able to get them back on the field. Gives me hope that the preventable stuff that we could have had last year prevented what our season may have looked like, that stuff's over and gone with, and we won't see it anymore. The other thing, and I'm getting that he talked about the quarterback battle a little bit, with some questions. Nothing really, he's basically happy with the way they're progressing and all. But during the portion where the media was there, they did do some 7-on-7 red zone work, and Sean Vazan and some others have dropped this in there. He was just the first one I saw post something on Twitter, so I'm kind of using him as my source because I think everybody else basically verified what he said. From these 7-on-7 red zone drills, Rattler went 6 for 8, threw 3 touchdowns. Shuck 7 for 8 with 1 touchdown, and Decker's got some work in there that they saw. 2 for 4 with 1 touchdown. And somebody mentioned, and I did not. Oh, Ross Jackson. Sorry, I did write it down. Jacobson caught that one. So, we talked a little while ago about he could be an important player in all this, trying to find that fourth tight end spot. Going, well, man, you have to turn some heads. You're going to have to do as much as you can do with that now. The general consensus, kind of reading everyone who was there and saw it, I don't, it's 7-on-7 OTAs with no contact. So you don't want to hear that somebody looked bad. Hadn't heard that yet. So that's at least a plus going, because, if they're looking bad right now, you're going, that probably pretty much kills your chances. But generally speaking, and I've seen this at a couple of different spots, that Rattler seems to be the guy right now that's operating this situation better in this this quarterback battle. Don't know in the long run what that's going to mean. This could change a lot when they get, and probably, I don't want to say probably, but maybe significantly once they get into the process where everybody's wearing pads and it's getting a little more alive in training camp. So, but so far, and look, I said all along, Spencer Rattler is not going to give up this job without a fight. That even though Shuck is, I mean, clearly the new coaching staff's guy, Kellen Moore's guy. Rattler's not going quietly tonight, and I don't think Hayner would have either. But he was already behind the cue ball on this from the jump, and then that injury opens the door for possibly Deckers sneaking into that third spot. So we'll see how all that works out. Basically, OTAs into minicamp. I will hopefully be attending both minicamp practices next week that are open to the public, and for the first time see it with my very own eyes what things are looking like. But I think right now it's you know it's hope. It's hope. Maybe we've made the changes all the way through, and this is, I think, just kind of been the theme of OTAs all the way through the process, from the front office, from scouting, from development, from the coaching staff, from the teaching the players, from the players learning, the players being in shape, ready to go with a training staff and a sports science staff that can keep them that way. In anything else that you can think of that went wrong in the last few seasons, there was a lot that's all being corrected, and we're getting back to the point where we're that's going to be automatic. Yeah, we know we're going to draft better. We know we're going to have better evaluation. We know we're going to develop players. We know that they're going to be able to learn. We know they're going to be physically on the field as much as possible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Make all that happen. Now we can realistically have that conversation. Can we win a division? Can we win 12, 13 games a season? Get back into that we're in the playoffs damn near every season with a team that's good enough to make a challenge for the Super Bowl. Really hoping the OTAs, this process is the kickstart to do it right. So let me know what you think in the comments, and how you're feeling on this. One thing that popped up in the comments, and I'll say it now because my response was I thought it, but I didn't have the balls to say it. The sports accountant brought this up to me yesterday when I was at his house and we were talking. It feels Sean Payton like, but yet not like Sean Payton. Gilmore's his own guy. That's clear. But as far as having that process, a plan, being very detail orientated, that I don't think we had the last 2.5, 3 seasons, that vibe, but in his own style. Little younger guy, probably a little more relatable to the younger generation of players. As an old guy, that's a hard pill for me to swallow, but I get it. So I think a lot of the same components of feelings are there. And those of y'all that pointed it out in the comments, yeah, I just didn't have the guts to say it could. But yeah, I think some of that is there. And hopefully the kind of stuff that we can build on. So any more great comments you guys have, and how OTAs are going and what you think about it, just make sure you go ahead and put them down there. First time here, subscribe, like, the whole 9 yards. Let's feed the algorithm. Keep rolling. I'll see y'all 2, 3, 4 times a week, whatever it takes. And until the next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.